Hello and welcome to Game Soup. Today we're doing a classic analysis on SNES RPGs. This is part 2 of our SNES RPGs classic analysis series. My name is Ed.
This is Joe.
Today we're looking at two classics, as indicated by the name. What's the first one? You know this game. This is Final Fantasy VI, or as it was known in America, Final Fantasy III.
Right, when it first came out, it was known... I'm pretty sure everybody knows this, but I guess we can go over it real quick. It was called Final Fantasy III in the States when it first came out because it was the third Final Fantasy game to come out in the States. And then it just got really confusing with the naming conventions later on, and we renamed everything to the Japanese version so that we would be on the same page worldwide.
Yeah, because after this they jumped straight to 7. They went straight from 3 to 7, which was a huge problem.
Yes.
Kind of confusing. But I'm kind of glad they just said, screw it, we're just going to make them all the same now, you know? So, much easier to follow. So let's see here. There's a lot to cover about this game, so we're just going to, I guess, try to touch on the highlights, if we can. So as far as scope goes, I mean, this is, to me, the SNES RPG, like, the defining RPG in terms of scope. Like, the story it tells is more mature, for one thing, and just huge in comparison to most other RPGs.
Yeah, very long, and the characters are all developed, and there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It accomplished things that I don't think any other game had accomplished before it.
Like, even just looking at Final Fantasy IV and V that were on the same system and just a few years prior to this, they almost seemed like prototypes. Like, they're great games by themselves, but the things that they try to tackle are finally brought to fruition, I feel like, in this game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say the gameplay in Final Fantasy V, I think I like the gameplay in Final Fantasy V more than the gameplay in this game, but I think the story in this game supersedes?
Sure.
Is that... No, I don't think that's the right word. Is better. It's better than.
Yeah, surpasses. I think
is the word I was looking for, yeah.
Yeah.
Surpasses the story in 4 or 5.
So I spent some time here looking at the menus, and already you can see numbers and numbers and tons of numbers and all these crazy names. Probably the crowning achievement of this game was the Esper system. Every Final Fantasy has its own unique system, and this game was the Esper system, and that was basically how you learned all your spells, right? And all the spells had a different rate of learning, so you really had to choose what kind of characters you wanted to make, because any character could learn any ability.
Yeah, all
right?
the characters in this game can use magic, which is pretty unique, and I think it's an interesting way to go. It's a way you could still go if you were developing an RPG now.
Yeah, oh yeah, it still works today. It's an interesting contrast with Final Fantasy V, where you had to choose a job and you were locked into that job. Here, there's no jobs. You're just basically, if you want to grind and learn every spell in the game with every character, you can do that.
Well, you could change the jobs in Final Fantasy V, so you could do sort of a similar thing.
Right.
But it wasn't attached to the actual summon.
Right.
The Espers, which are summons in this game.
So, and I think
we should clarify that.
Yeah, Espers are, the traditional summons. And in a way, this game, I know I just said that 4 and 5 were sort of the precursor to this game, but in a way, this game was the precursor to 7, and I guess 8 and 9 if you want to include that. But sort of like not medieval, but sort of like the half-industrial age that they were going for in this game. They also sort of brought back for Final Fantasy 7. So, again, 7 seemed to be slightly, I guess, an evolution on a lot of the aspects of this game.
Yeah, I mean, the world in Final Fantasy has almost always been kind of a tech medieval kind of setting, but I think they really pushed it in Final Fantasy 7, especially starting you in Midgar and everything.
Yeah, and they really nailed it here with the, we have some footage coming up of just the first 5 minutes of this game, where they really nail it. You've got like the smoke rising from columns and just a really sort of somber soundtrack, and it's the presentation on this game is fantastic. And of course the Mode 7 here, right? This great Mode 7 on the overworld. Like, it also looks fantastic. There's pretty much nothing about this game that isn't great. It's kind of a simple way to put it.
There are some frustrating parts, though.
The
last time we played through this game, we played through it together. It was before we started Game Soup. Was the last time we played this game. But there are definitely some parts in this game that are frustrating. It's not a perfect game, and there's some parts where it can be a little bit confusing where to go. But beyond that, there's some difficulty spikes and a little bit of grinding here and there if you haven't played the game before and you don't know the enemy's weaknesses and where to go. So it can be a little bit esoteric at parts, and maybe not most, but newer RPGs hopefully learn from the mistakes of the older ones. And while this game's still worth playing, there are going to be some things that you might be frustrated if you're more familiar with newer RPGs.
Yeah, I mean, even with Square Enix, in their newer titles, they do away with a lot of those things that might be frustrating to a player now, in this game. But just gameplay wise, it's still fantastic for breaking a lot of ground and trying a lot of new things. And as far as Square Enix goes, they sort of have their own particular brand of RPG. And again, it sort of felt like they were building up to this one. In terms of all the depth of the mechanics and such. I don't know, there's a lot that you can learn from it. And there's a lot that other RPGs developers can learn from it too.
Yeah, this game's almost like the template for this kind of game.
Yeah, this kind of set the bar at a new level.
Yeah, for turn-based battle system in a JRPG kind of setting with the long epic story, this is what spawned about at least a decade of games after it. And while it's evolved a little bit more towards an action RPG an action RPG environment, I guess, is more the norm right now. But you still do have the turn-based JRPGs, and this is kind of still what they're based on, I guess. Still the kind of the template for it, almost.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring up something else. As far as the depth of the combat goes, maybe in other RPGs, every character is more or less the same. They can all use the same magic. But in this game, every character has a unique ability that no other character can use. So just there, we saw that Terra had the ability to morph, right, and become an Esper form, which has unique benefits. And Edgar he just used drill in that last battle, which is really awesome.
That's tools. His is called tools, and that's one of the tools that you can find.
Yeah, if you look at the menu there.
So his, you have to find and buy the items. So each character has their own unique mechanics that you can learn. So they each have their own unique story, their own unique mechanics, but they can all learn magic. Mm-hmm. So it keeps the game simple enough, at least on the magic side, because every character works the same, but it makes it interesting by having them each have a different special ability.
Right. But now that you say that, there is something that I'm thinking of here, and it's that there's a lot of magic in the game. There's a lot of magic, and there are a lot of abilities. There's a chance you might be overloaded when you go to play this game.
Yeah, it might be a little bit superfluous. Like, there's a thing to be said for complexity versus complication, and this game almost crosses, like Rasp. I don't even know what that does.
Yeah,
like there's some weird abilities that are almost never used.
Like sleep. When would you actually use sleep on an enemy? Probably not. You're probably just going to attack them until they die, right? Like, it's cool that you have so many options and you can choose whatever play style you want. But it can be kind of unnecessary. And maybe there's somebody out there who loves all those options and loves to use Rasp on every guy. That's cool. I think Rasp is for MP absorbing. I'm not really sure.
That might be right. You might be right about that.
And I wanted to get this fight too because of Ultros.
Yeah, these are kind of two famous characters, especially Ultros in the Final Fantasy series.
I got some of his dialogue. Oh yeah, and there I wanted to show just an Esper going off, just so you could see the graphical increase, I guess, because you have these traditional sprites, and then you have these really nice looking Espers.
Yeah, the enemies and the Espers, I think, I'm not sure. I don't know if I read this somewhere or if I just guessed that this is how they did it, but I think they're actually like hand painted. Like they probably used acrylics or something on canvas, and then they would scan them and trace them with just go over them pixel by pixel and do the pixel art over the painting. So that's why the graphics in the Final Fantasy Super Nintendo games look. At least the enemy graphics and the Esper graphics are kind of heads over tails better than most other games at the time, because they weren't just drawn straight to pixel. They took a huge amount of time to make everything.
So I wonder why they would do that for all the enemies but not for the main characters.
Well, because they're smaller. The main characters are small sprites, so you can't put as much detail. Like there's no point really in painting those to make, because I'm not sure exactly what they might be like 32 by 64.
Yeah, they're pretty small, I guess.
That's what they are. So there's not really any point in that. They can kind of just use a template for the characters. They all have basically the same face, and they just kind of change the hair and the clothes, but there's not enough to have any rendering.
Right.
They can't have any texture. That's why it makes sense to do it for the larger sprites, because you can actually show some kind of a texture with the rendering.
Right. Oh, that makes sense.
So, and I could be I could be completely wrong. Maybe they did do it pixel for pixel. If so, bravo, because I don't think I'd be able to do that.
Yeah.
I'd have to paint it first.
And it's kind of amazing if you look at Final Fantasy IV, then 5, then 6. Each game has its own distinct graphical upgrades, and it's kind of amazing how much progress they made just in a few short years. Like, I'm always amazed when I look at Final Fantasy V and the character sprites they look a little bit deformed, but here they look way more realistic, and there were huge improvements just on the character sprites, which does a lot for, I guess, sort of drawing the player in. If the characters look nice, they're distinct and you can sort of identify with them.
Yeah, I think the artists really hit their stride somewhere between Final Fantasy 5 and 6 as far as the artwork in the series went. And then they went to 3D, so kind of abandoned all this.
Yeah.
And now they did remakes of all the old Final Fantasy games, and they look terrible.
But those are also 3D. Yeah. Those are horrible.
They're in HD,
oh, God.
But when you get bad artists to just trace over beautiful pixel art, it looks very bad.
Yeah. Final Fantasy V just came out on Steam. Or no, Final Fantasy VI just came out on Steam. 5 was released a couple months ago, I guess.
This is the frustrating part. This is one of the difficulty spikes.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about this?
You can talk about it.
I'm not sure if I'm going to say all that you're going to say, but this is really hard. So, and I think what's going on here is when you get to this part of the game, you're at the floating continent, right? Now, a new player might say, hey, this is probably the final area of the game. Might be a possibility. Kind of feels like a final area, but it's really hard. And you might have to grind for a long time.
And the save point is very far back.
Yeah.
That's kind of the main thing. There's not enough save points to eliminate the frustration when the player dies here. And there isn't a part in the game that's this frustrating up until this point. So either if you know what you're doing, or you're over leveled, or you're very lucky. Then
but
you're not going to make it through here without having some level of frustration and maybe turning the game off and hopefully coming back to it, but maybe never coming back to it again.
Yeah, that's quite a possibility. Did you see, I almost used break there, but then I realized nobody uses break, so I'm not going to use break.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a huge sticking point. In these older RPGs, when you get a game over, that's it. With the exception of Mario RPG, which I loved. And I guess really not just older RPGs, but most RPGs. You get a game over, whatever time you sunk into it, it's gone. That time is just gone forever. There's no chance of recovery. And for this zone in particular.
Yeah, it's just a very long time. You lose a lot of time.
Yeah.
Especially in modern design, you don't want players to lose more than 5, maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's pushing it, because
if you're using save points,
there's so many other games that gamers could be playing, and if you give them reason to, they're gonna leave.
Yeah. So you kind of want to avoid that, especially now when there's so many choices for what game you can play, and we've learned, you can tell just from playing games yourself, you know what's going to feel frustrating, and if you play test it and you feel frustrated when you get killed, you should probably either adjust the difficulty or you could just adjust the difficulty or put the save points closer together. If they were to redesign this, they could either just make it a little bit easier so that most players won't die when they go through it, or just put another save point in the middle.
I think to a player, giving more save points feels like you've accomplished less, because that's a very visual indicator. It's a very obvious indicator that the developer's throwing you a bone. But if you just keep the save point at the beginning but make the enemy slightly less difficult, I don't know, at least to me that sort of feels a little bit more...
I would do it the other way, to be honest.
You would do it the other way?
I would make the enemies more difficult, so it feels more satisfying to beat difficult enemies, but you don't get as punished for it.
Yeah.
So
that's probably better for time saving anyway.
Multiple ways to do it.
Oh man, I could talk about that game for hours. We've just barely touched on all the things that it did, but time to go on to our next one here, which is Earthbound.
Starring Ness.
Starring Ness. Yeah. Actually, starring this guy. That's not Ness.
Is that Lucas?
Is it Jeff?
Or Jeff?
Is it Jeff? I don't know.
No, I think it's Jeff.
And the monkey. So I actually played Mother 3, which is Earthbound 3, I guess, more than I played this game. And it's funny how much they have in common. And they're both fantastic games, pretty much for all the same reasons. Charm. Number one is charm. Yeah,
we've seen a lot of charming games tonight.
We sure have.
The previous episode we did weird games or Japanese games, whatever we wind up calling them.
Yeah.
With Goemon and Hammer and Harry.
This guy's devoted to making dungeons. He's the dungeon man, the first combination of human and dungeon in history. So, I mean, visually, this game doesn't have anything on Final Fantasy VI, right? It's much more cartoony, much more exaggerated, I guess.
It's older too. It came out before, right?
Yeah. So it doesn't shoot for any of the same goals, I guess is the best way to put it. Final Fantasy VI tries to tell a deep story with a lot of well-developed characters, and it succeeds. But this game is
kind of making fun of those. It kind of would be making fun of traditional RPGs like the Final Fantasy games.
Yeah.
It kind of breaks the fourth wall, which a lot of games do. Like Undertale is the most recent example of a big game that's constantly breaks the fourth wall.
And I mean, and you could say that game is a direct result of, you know, this game's influence.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that.
Yeah, a lot of people have compared them, but it's really nothing more than a surface level comparison if you play both games. I guess their humor is a little bit similar.
So like the color palette gets a little bit darker here because we're in a dungeon.
Yeah.
It's a cave. It's a nice touch.
Yeah, everything about this game, it's a really colorful game, and especially these battles, like the backgrounds in these battles are trippy. Everything about this game is trippy as well.
Yeah.
All the enemies, they're really strange. I love this. You're just fighting rats and slugs. And like normally that would be kind of boring. But this is goofy, you know? And even if you lose, like it's still goofy. So I think that's the main idea for Earthbound, that, you know, like Itoi, I guess he was like the lead developer, basically the guy who created Earthbound.
And you didn't kill them; they became tame.
Yeah, they became tame. Yeah, they didn't die.
The interesting. It's kind of a nice thing. It's nicer than it's like they attacked you, but you know you just roughed them up a little bit to tame them.
You sent them on their way. So yeah. Like all the RPG tropes that you might see in the SNES era, this game, by and large, kind of tries to do everything differently. You know, like there's an iron pencil there, which I think you have to get rid of with an eraser. Does that sound familiar to you?
I forget.
Oh, okay.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, but there's a lot of really goofy moments like that that are just flat out breaking the fourth wall. You call your dad on the phone to save the game and to withdraw money. Well, you withdraw money from the ATMs, but you use ATMs, which in an RPG of this scale and I guess, although I guess when it came out it wasn't a huge hit. I think it's gained more of a cult status.
Yeah, for sure.
But for an RPG of this depth and length at least, it had some really strange choices. It's quirky in every way. The music, like the music right here, it sounds ridiculous, but all of these little things really go a long way towards this being an endearing experience.
Yeah, so if you're gonna go for something for a game like this where it's goofy and it's a parody, you kind of gotta go all the way, I think.
Yeah.
Like in every aspect.
Yeah.
So you don't want to take it. You either want to make a game that's a real story, like the one we just played, Final Fantasy VI, or the one we just showed, Final Fantasy VI, or you want to do something that's a goofy cartoon like this.
Yeah, it was unintentional, but I think these two games are essentially polar opposites as far as SNES RPGs go.
Yeah, like similar style of gameplay, but
yeah,
polar opposites in style, in graphical, sound, and character design, and everything besides the gameplay. I mean, obviously the gameplay's a little bit different, but they're both JRPGs for the most part.
So the sound design is really interesting as well, because as far as I know, I don't think I'm lying here. I think this is truth. But there were samples in this game of Beatles songs played backwards, like on the main title screen. Oh no. Alright, I'm gonna cut this part out too, hold on.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think its cult classic status is earned. There's, like, look at the inventory. Big bottle rocket, ruler, protractor. All these crazy things you've never seen in an RPG before. And it takes itself just seriously enough to give the player an awesome experience. Really satisfying experience. Like, the battle mechanics are deep enough that it's going to feel like an RPG and not just kind of cheap. And the characters.
Yeah, if you're going to be playing it for as long as you would play an RPG for, you need the mechanics to be at least interesting.
Yeah. And all these interesting characters. We just, we saw the Dungeon Man. And there's characters like that all over the place. And even the enemies, they're oozing charm, which is just, I hate saying that when it's not true, but in this case, definitely true. So yeah, it's a cult classic. I believe it didn't sell that well when it came out, but it's just one of those things where word gets around. And I kind of thought Undertale was going to be like that too, but it turns out that that's just a classic. That wasn't a cult classic at all.
Yeah.
It's just a huge game. But I think it owes a lot to Earthbound. Can't say for sure. I'm not Toby Fox, or am I? I'm not. But I think we hit the highlights here. Yeah, this is a great game to play if you just want a light RPG experience. I shouldn't say that because it gets pretty heavy. But for the majority of the game, It's pretty light, it's really entertaining, and it's funny. So if you don't want to grind on the floating continent for a couple hours and get frustrated and turn it off, give this game a try instead. I guarantee you'll like it. You have the Ed guarantee, which means nothing, but play it anyway. So,
yeah, and there's a lot to learn from it if you're a game designer or a fledgling game designer.
Yeah. Now we didn't even talk about the rolling HP meters. We didn't talk about battle at all. Tell us what you think. I mean, there's a lot we could get into. We could talk again for hours, but we'll let you guys start the conversation. So yeah, tell us what you think in the comments, and I don't know. Let's have a friendly discussion on Earthbound, because it's a great game, and Final Fantasy VI too. All right, well I guess we'll call it here for now. So thanks for joining us, and this has been a classic analysis.
Thank you.